Good morning. This is the first post in our search for an answer as to whether conspiracy theorists have a basis for their concern. They claim that the world is on the brink of a global reset that involves depopulating up to 5 billion people from the planet. In future posts, I will be individually looking at peak oil, global warming, COVID-19, the Great Reset, depopulation, intrusive technology, and transhumanism. I will investigate these phenomena in the hope of finding out what the powers ruling the world have in store for us. Today, I start the investigation by looking at the Universal Bill of Rights and how it has been used since it was implemented. The laws of every country are different. So when looking at a crisis like a global pandemic that affects every country, the sensible place to start any investigation is the validity to the reaction to the crisis. This is the International Bill of Rights. It is not my intention to go through the article of the bill, but to look at the overall general thrust of the rules that countries generally agreed to adhere to when dealing with individuals and each other. We must first, however, note that the rules are only a guide to the way nations should act. They are not enforceable like the laws of a particular land. You cannot put a country in jail or to death because it commits civil rights abuses. The best you can do is to place an embargo on it or torture it into submission with whips of bombs and rockets. In 1941, Franklin Roosevelt called for the protection of what he called the 4 essential freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, freedom from fear, and freedom from want. As a result of these ravages brought about upon the world in the Second World War, the International Bill of Human Rights and the International Covenant on Economic and Social and Cultural Rights was proclaimed before the General Assembly of the United Nations on December the 10th, 1948. It was then ratified by most countries in 1976. Objections to the bill surfaced almost immediately. Many countries claimed it to be primarily a product of Western thought and the West's view of the world. So how the Bill of Rights was defined became an issue right from the very beginning. One major objection raised was that there are many variations in the ways it could be interpreted. For example, what exactly is meant by freedom of expression or self-determination? Does this give the countries the right to deny freedom of expression to, say, the blacks in South Africa, who did not have the right to vote and therefore were not recognized as citizens? And having freedom, for that matter, an objection came by some Muslim countries that women were not equal to men and therefore should not have the same freedom. A second objection asked where individual rights were founded. Are they a matter of individual preference and how a person views a situation, or are they founded and cemented in cultural and historic experience? With a lack of general consensus concerning an individual's civil rights and political rights, America, with its liberal views, became the primary advocate of pushing the bill through. It wanted to establish itself as the self-proclaimed leader of liberalism and the universal grant of individual freedom. Liberalism, however, places the individual at the center of a legal, political, and social theory, but takes no regard for the adverse consequences of unconstrained individualism by either an individual or a country. The USA, as advocates of this system, failed to see the differences between an ideal as theory and the unintended consequences of real actions. Realizing unconstrained capitalism and the pursuit of individual rights has manifested itself in the realm of justification. Under liberalism, an individual's wrong, evil, or illegal actions can now be mitigated by any manufactured defense or justification. Left to the courts, acceptance of justification became arbitrary at best and downright corrupt at worst. This has been proven many times. It also saw a proliferation in the legal profession, interpreting the law in any way that convenienced their clients, criminals and evildoers, who got released on the slightest mismanagement of any meaningless article of proof. Liberalism gives power to the individual, and the power of liberalism is money. Money now speaks louder than justice. A third, and the strongest objection to the Bill of Rights, came from the basic writings of Karl Marx. Spoken through the words of the Chinese, Marx claimed that individual rights should not supersede community rights. His interpretation meant that liberty is not found on the relationship of man on man, but the separation of man from man. Marx said that the pursuit of individual liberty places man in conflict with other men. In Western society, it is easy to see that this has proven the case. Liberalist philosophy not only pits the rights of one individual against another, it pits the West against socialist states. It puts countries in conflict with their own allies. The commercial might and military power of the US has been unashamedly used against its own allies to advance its own ambitions. Socialism has some terrible exemplars, just as liberalism has. To get to the form of liberalism we now have, the world has endured democracy, feudalism, monarchism, federalism, dictatorship, fascism, and other right-wing ethos, all of which have been forerunners of liberalism. Socialism started the same, with Russian and Maoist communism. It is a much younger form of management, but it is now morphed to include free enterprise. Socialism is a form of collectivism. It gives the collective members of a group, society, or country the right to decide their own future, regardless of any individual who might stand in its way. The community right has now been labelled by liberalists as communism, to scare people into believing it is the same as it was when Mao took over China and communism took over Russia. It is used to scare people into believing it is the same as it was. Collectivism, however, is not likened to communism in that it does not restrict individual liberty, provided that liberty does not conflict with the common good. Liberalism falls down because it takes capitalism and treats it as an entity, as a thing. But society is not an object like a house or a car. It is an ever-changing entity that only ever exists as an accumulation of thought in the minds of people. Outside of the individual, groups, societies, and nations do not exist. Each are merely concepts. Groups of people should be allowed the power to govern how individuals should act. Liberalism is claimed to proliferate freedom, but it does so at the expense of anyone standing in its way. The interpretation of freedom that should be heard is that individuals should be granted the right to pursue their own good in their own way, provided they do not provide others of their freedom and their pursuit or their rights to pursue their own good. When we see the unintended consequences of the Bill of Rights that left individuals to interpret it any way they liked, we see how it also left many areas for countries to implement the bill as they choose to interpret it. Countries suffer no fear of retribution because there is no direct means to enforce any individual interpretation of their variations. The Universal Bill of Human Rights was simply a means of Western powers under the coercion of the United States to implement a way of thinking over the world that suited its own goals and aims. The result is that the USA, with their more advanced war machinery, declared themselves as self-proclaimed policemen of the world. Having gathered many countries into an alliance of thought, the USA has used this association to proliferate its own aims and agendas under the umbrella of freedom. If we look at the conflicts undertaken since the Second World War, we see the truth of this statement. Many are minor, although no conflict is minor to those on the ground fighting and bleeding. But it becomes clear that in many cases the international community has been used as a dupe to support United States colonialism and capitalism under the guise of freedom. I list some of these conflicts. The Korean War, which is still ongoing, the conflict in Laos, the invasion of the Dominican Republic, the Iranian crisis, Vietnam, the conflict in the Philippines, the Angolan War, the Lebanese Civil War, the invasion of Grenada, the bombing of Libya, various wars in Afghanistan, which are still ongoing, the invasion of Panama, the 1990 Gulf War, the Iraqi Civil War, the insurgency in Yemen, the ongoing war on terror, various other Iraqi wars, the war in northwest Pakistan, the Iranian conflict that is still ongoing, and the 2006 Lebanon War, the Mexican War on drugs, Operation Enduring Freedom across the Sahara, the Somali Civil War, the Libyan Civil War, the Syrian Civil War and its spillover into Lebanon, the Iraqi insurgency, the Iraqi Civil War, which is still ongoing, and the Libyan Civil War that is still ongoing. Regardless of what justification the US gave before entering these conflicts, almost all have advanced or attempted to advance the ideology of the United States with little regard for anybody but themselves. To justify their aggression and gather allies around them, the USA has relentlessly created publicity that demonizes the opposition. Deliberate provocation and/or false flag-waving incidents almost always precede them starting a war. The Iraq War is one classic example when they manufactured evidence that the country possessed weapons of mass destruction. We see it happening even now, this very day, as the US uses the identity of Philippine civil aircraft to cross the Yellow Sea near China, and a US spy plane impersonating a Malaysian aircraft trespassing on China's Hunan Island in a seeming attempt to precipitate an incident. More than a dozen military overflights this year alone are deceptions committed by the US in an apparent attempt to provoke China that has remained stoically calm, other than to raise its level of readiness in case an actual attack by the US occurs. A general overview of the conflicts of the last 70 years sees that every war it has been involved in has been instigated in one form or another by the USA. They have always been the instigator. They have always been the aggressor. No wars have been fought on the soil of the United States of America. Most conflicts have been supported by troops from other nations under the guise of suppressing oppression, but most conflicts have been fought to gain benefit for the capitalist tendencies of the USA, or been to intervene in situations that might impact the future being of the United States. The only conflict that has touched USA soil was the 9/11 bombing of the World Trade Center, and this, if the official version is to be accepted, could, and I repeat could, be interpreted as a retaliatory action and therefore a justified action. What liberalism and unbridled capitalism has brought to the United States of America is wealth beyond reason and development beyond all expectations, which has led their leaders to believe their system of individual rights is the best ever developed to proliferate a good life. But it has also brought excessive poverty, pessimism, depression, crime, oppression, and excessive waste, which has raped most of the world of its peace and opportunity. The USA, with 5% of the world's population, uses 25% of the world's resources, leaving a threat to the entire planet through global warming, which many see as the reason for a great reset and a reason that the world needs depopulating. Under unconstrained liberalism, a deed being done, then justified, is the result of unrestrained power, and that power is money. The USA has enshrined the words of Wall Street that greed is good. Unlimited success in greed means unlimited power. Unlimited power has become the hallmark of liberalism and the United States' effort to control the world. Conspiracy theorists now believe the emphasis is shifted from neocolonialism to actual domination through technology, and this will manifest itself in depopulation, in an effort to control the human carbon footprint that contributes so much to climate change. Is depopulation necessary to control climate change? Many would argue yes. Do the powers that be have the right to control the population of the earth? To look at the answer to this, it is written within the Universal Bill of Rights, if we go to section 29, which states, "Everyone shall be subject only to such limitations as are determined by law to secure due recognition for the respects, rights, and freedom of others." On the face of this, it seems to control the use of power, but an alternative interpretation gives unlimited power. As we have seen, member nations can interpret the bill in any way they see fit, so they have the right to engage in any activity or perform any act against any state, group, or person aimed at the destruction of any of the rights or freedoms set herein or therein. If the government deems an act to be in your best interests, they have the right and a duty bound to do anything they want. Depopulation for the sake of a few elite effectively reverses the stance of the USA makes on collectivism. Yes, a government can do whatever it likes if it deems to be protecting its people. Killing some for the protection of others then becomes a warped sense of justification. This brings us to the act of corruption. When people spend enormous amounts of money to be elected, we must ask why. Putting ideology aside, It can only be for power and money. In blatant electioneering here, where I live, political cronies go house to house, offering families money for their votes. I said to one who told me this, "Do you not realize that if a politician gives 1,000 families 1,000 units of currency to vote for it, they will take 10 million units of currency for themselves once they are elected? That this money should be going into hospitals and schools." His answer was, "Yes, we know, but our families need the money. We are poor. We have to feed ourselves." The USA has deteriorated so far into this realm of individual liberalism that they demonstrate to the world a blatant and prominent case of corruption at the highest level, and we can see this in their country today. I have so far spoken only in overview, but the rights of free speech is one area that should be looked at in isolation. I will use the case of Julius Assange, who has been holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy in London for 8 years after being charged with espionage for leaking 170,000 classified and unclassified US documents to the public. In 2016, a United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention concluded that Assange had been subject to arbitrary detention and he should be allowed to walk free and given compensation. After continuing classified documents, however, from Syria, New Zealand, Saudi Arabia, and US military operations in Yemen and Turkey, Assange was indicted on 17 new charges, carrying prison terms of 170 years. This clearly demonstrates that the United States is prepared to do anything to see Assange be brought to what they call justice. Many see Assange as a heroic figure, a defender of freedom of the press and the people's right to know the truth. In 2010, Time magazine voted him Person of the Year. In Australia, he was awarded the Sydney Peace Foundation Gold Medal for Peace with Justice. But the Australian government later abandoned him. Why? Was political power brought to bear by the United States of America? It is reasonable to assume so. His case exemplifies the problem of freedom of speech and the people's right to know pitted against the power of unconstrained liberalism. We are seeing the people's right to free speech now constrained in multimedia. The USA's relentless pursuit of Assange is also a demonstration that in pursuit of its liberalist agenda, the US government believes it can do anything it wishes. Anything they want to do, they can. All is acceptable by manipulating the interpretation of words. Yes, according to its vague wording and variety of interpretations, a government like the USA, the policeman of the world now, can pursue its own agenda and do whatever it likes. It can determine that you be legally locked down, forced to wear a face mask, denied travel, forced to accept a vaccine, and even disposed of if deemed to be in the common good of the liberal elite, the powerful, and the extremely rich. In other words, the USA stops at nothing to promote its own good. It plays both sides of the political agenda, even manipulating the World Health Organization to lock down the whole world while it formulates its own future. The world is now divided into power blocks: the USA, China, Russia, and the European Union. So on an objective scale, the question that begs is, are we seeing USA-style liberalism in its rise to complete supremacy, or its death throes, as happened to the British, Spanish, and others back to the Romans and Greeks? Does technology, this time, make American capitalistic colonialism different? Are we now to see, through the power of technology, a great reset and depopulation up to 5 billion people off the planet? Today we have discovered that the International Bill of Human Rights is simply a document that gives the power to interpret any way a country wants. And for a power as dominant as the USA, as long as it can enforce its will over others, which is exactly what the USA has done for the last 80-odd years, the power to implement any changes it wants is legitimate. In the next post, I will look at peak oil, the first of various aspects causing the world to face another problem it has never before encountered. Peak oil may be another factor that will end the world as we know it and lead to the necessity for depopulation. Following peak oil, I will, in individual posts, look at global warming, COVID-19, the Great Reset, depopulation, intrusive technology, and transhumanism to try and discover where our world, ours and yours and mine, are heading in the foreseeable future. Please press subscribe and make a comment in the comment box if you would like to. Have a good day. I hope I will see you in the next post.